Howdy. Today on our distance learning, we'll take a look and want to build on what we've been doing, and we want to take a look at why cities are where they are, and why are places like Bennington the size they are. Kennard, Arlington, why are they the size they are? And there's actually a reason why this is, and it fits into what we've talked about: Omaha, urban growth, suburban sprawl, bedroom communities, and stuff like that. The guy that came up with the model is Christaller, but I'm not just going to say, hey, here's a model, kids, you got to know it. What a model is explains why things are the way they are, and you can show that it's effective because you can show it in a lot of areas. Well, Christaller was originally from Europe, but this model kind of explains a lot about Bennington and Omaha. So let's take a look at a geographic concept, a model, but we're going to try to make it really simple. Simple, understanding, and you get it. And we'll kind of get to it. All right, but let's start out. Remember, I've always told you geography is the why of where. Why are things where they are, you know? And why are there some towns in Nebraska that are bigger than others? Why do you have little towns like the Arlingtons, the Kennards, and stuff like that? Why is Wahoo where it is and the size that it is, you know? Why did Elkhorn get bigger than Bennington and then get swallowed by the city? There's a lot of questions and a lot of things about cities you need to know, okay? There's another big question. Why don't we have a blank in Bennington? I mean, I've heard people say, well, why don't we have a Walmart in Bennington? When are we going to get a Walgreens? I mean, Walgreens is like the 51st state. Turn around and there's either Walgreens or a Walmart everywhere, right? Why don't we have them in Bennington? Well, there's reasons why, and it's a geographical principle, what we're trying to talk about today. Well, let me step back just a second. When I was a kid, Bennington was a lot farther away from Omaha. We used to be able to stand at the top of the hill there by the big red barn and look at the lights of Omaha, and you say, wow, look how far away it is. And Westroads was about the edge of town. Bennington, back in those days when I was a kid, had a grocery store, you know. Bennington had a hardware store, Dale's True Value. And, you know, Mangold's Grocery, you know. But we had stuff in Bennington. Today, it's changed a lot. My wife is from North Dakota, and up in North Dakota, you drive forever. We were talking about this, and she told me, like, to go see a movie, they had to drive about a half an hour to 40 minutes. If you wanted to do your big shopping, you drove about 45 minutes one way, and it'd go into Fargo, and that's where they'd do their stuff. There was a local grocery store in town, but for their bigger grocery shopping, they had to drive, and it was a lot farther. North Dakota, you're used to that. I mean, it's a bigger state. There's not that many people in it. Well, this is kind of what we're talking about today. And it also will explain a lot what we've talked about with the suburbs and stuff. All right. Here's a map of the United States at night, okay? If you look at all the lights, you can see the bigger things. You can see Chicago up by the Great Lakes, Minneapolis, and on the East Coast. Look at the lights like New York, the big lights around Boston, and all the way, Megapolis, all the way from New York. Down, you've got Philadelphia and Baltimore, down to, you know, the Washington area. Then when you go out to where we're at, you can kind of see Nebraska. You could see Interstate 80 right along the middle part of the map. If you come and you find Chicago by Great Lakes, go over up and over till you see basically Minneapolis, St. Paul. If you come straight down from Minneapolis, St. Paul, almost you're going to see Des Moines. West of Des Moines is Omaha. And in Nebraska, you can see all the lights along Interstate 80. That area right above Interstate 80 where it starts, that's the Sandhills. That's a lot of counties out there where there's a lot less people in it. And a lot of those people are happier living there than they are around here because they've got a lot more peace and quiet. But where the cities are and why there are have reasons. Of course, if you look at the way west by Nevada, you know, there's mountains out there, there's deserts, and that affects where people live. And if you look at Canada, obviously the further north you are in Canada, the less big population centers are because of the climate. But this is what we're going to talk about today, where the cities are and why. Okay, there was a guy named Walter Christaller. Hey, surprise, surprise, another German geographer, you know? But he wasn't a Nazi, but he was a German. And Christaller, he came up with an idea, and he said there's got to be a reason why cities are where they are in relation to each other. And he came up with what's called the central place model, or central place theory. And it really works. Now, he assumes, just like our friend von Thunen did, that there's no physical barriers like mountains and deserts and stuff like that. The soil's equal, and it's a uniform transportation system. But Christaller said if everything was equal, there'd be a reason where everything was what it was. Okay. Now you do got to know a couple phrases or words. Okay. We're going to take a look at a couple things, but the first one I really want you to go to is range of sale. There is a distance that people will be willing to drive to get certain things. If you've got to go to a hospital, you're going to go quite a ways, you know? If you want to get furniture in Nebraska, yeah, you want to come to Omaha because, like, Mrs. B's has got a huge selection. Well, Crete's has got furniture, and a lot of other places do too. So if you're getting something smaller locally, yeah, people do that. But when people get bigger stuff, like I've got a sister-in-law up in Sioux Falls, comes all the way down to Omaha to get stuff from NFM because if she's buying a lot, it's worth her while. So how far people are going to drive for stuff is really important. Threshold, the amount of people it's your need to make something viable or practical. Think about it. If you're going to have an airport like we've got Epley, you have to have enough of a population that are going to be flying in and out. Grand Island has an airport. Blair's got a municipal airport, but those are smaller planes. If you're going to have something big like an airport, you have to have a big enough population to support it. The flights in and out. We get a lot of people flying in and out of Epley. If you think about it, there's certain other things like amusement parks. Well, you can have smaller amusement parks in smaller towns, but you have a big amusement park where the people can support it, like in the Kansas cities, your Worlds of Fun and stuff. There's certain things that you need more people for, you know? So keep those two things in mind, and then also throw that centrality thing. Basically, people are going to be clustered in areas because they really will go so far for stuff, and the center of that area are going to be shopping centers or news centers. If you look over at the map on Iowa, okay, look at Des Moines. If you live within a set distance of Des Moines, that's where you're going to do your bigger shopping. That's where you do your entertainment stuff. Yeah. And if you look at there's a dotted light blue line that's further out, there's going to be a point when you're so far out from Des Moines, that you're not going to want to go to Des Moines for everything, but you'll go to Des Moines for the bigger stuff. If you look, it's the same thing with Omaha and Council Bluffs. And this is what Christaller was saying, basically. You're going to have these big areas that things are focused around. And you've got an area that they draw to. People that live, TV stations. The threshold for a TV station, you need a lot of population or it's going to be a bigger area. So if in Omaha, we've got our four news stations, and we're going to cover all the weather in the Omaha Council Bluffs area. Well, what if you live west of here, like Atlantic, between Atlantic and Des Moines? Are you getting your weather from Omaha or Des Moines? Are you getting your newspaper from Omaha or Des Moines? Well, probably Iowa, you're going to get the Des Moines Register, okay? And so when you take a look at all these things, the central place theory is actually going to fall into place. This is going to explain where cities are and the size of cities. There is a centrality and there's a connection. Now, again, I'm trying to make this really, really simple, all right? Let's take a look at the actual hexagon. This is the genius of Christaller. Now, it's a model. It's not perfect like this ever. But he says if you look at the very center, it's going to be the city. The city's going to be your big metropolitan area, a lot of people. Okay, in the city, because you have a lot of people, you're going to have services that cities can support. There will be dentists in the small towns like Pierce, Nebraska. Yeah, you can have a dentist there. But if you need oral surgery, you're going to come into Omaha. Blair has a hospital, but they're not doing transplants in Blair. They come into the med center. So you're going to have some services that you can have further out, but bigger services, because you need a bigger area to support them, you're going to have a city. Okay, now look at this thing. Right around the city, that's the big urban area, okay? The first ring of the things around this are going to be hamlets. Now, this is when in class I always make a traditional joke about a melancholy Dane, and only one of you gets that one. I'm not talking about Dane. I'm talking about the Shakespeare play Never mind, it isn't worth it. Anyhow, but hamlets are small little towns. Think about it. The little towns, that the businesses in the hamlet cannot compete with the city. Like Bennington. It's, a lot of people say, why don't we get a grocery store in Bennington? Why don't we get this or that in Bennington? Well, we really can't compete with Omaha, And people who live in Bennington are willing to drive. And since Omaha's crept up to us, it's one of those things. People will go, so around the big cities, you're going to have smaller little hamlets. And these hamlets are far enough out where there's just a little space between the city. Don't think of Bennington anymore. Once upon a time, Bennington was a hamlet. Bennington wasn't that big, kids, when I was young. Today, think of cities out a little bit, okay? Utan. Think Kennard. Think Arlington, okay? If you're down south, you got to think of like things, little towns, like uh, down by Louisville, Springfield, stuff like that. So you have a hamlet. Usually, the hamlet around the cities, people live there, and in the old days in farming, you had a hamlet basically or a town every 10 miles. Because in Nebraska, 10 miles is about as far as you could take a load of corn or whatever to town with a wagon pulled by a horse and get back in a day. So you had what used to be called 10-mile towns. And so you have all these hamlets, but today, you don't take your corn to town in a wagon with a horse. You take it in a semi. And so what happens is these little hamlets, which used to be locally, people don't need them as much. In each hamlet, you're going to have services that the locals need. You'll need a post office. The post office has to deliver the mail. You're going to have a gas station. People need gas left and right. Smaller stuff like that. Smaller shops, smaller mom and pop shops. Maybe a restaurant or a cafe. Like you go up to Kamen, you get some of the best pie in Nebraska there. Or like Oakland, go up to Oakland Craig. They've got some neat little shops up there. But the hamlets are going to have smaller businesses because people can't compete with the city. They're going to drive into the city. Okay. Now look at the next ring of the hex out. There's going to be a distance away from the city where now you get these things called villages. A village is going to be a little bit bigger, okay? Like a Fremont size or a Blair size. Think about it. If you live in Fremont, yeah, if you want something big, you're still going to come into Omaha for something big. But people don't want to travel for everything. Blair has a movie theater right there on the edge of town. You know what I'm saying? Blair's got grocery stores. Fremont's got business in town. People will go and get a car at Deers or whatever in Fremont, or up in Woodhouse and Blair. They get their groceries there. Blair's got a pharmacy, Fremont pharmacy and other businesses. So what happens is you're getting away from the city, and now these businesses start to make sense. Why do you want to drive 35 minutes into Omaha from Fremont when you can get that stuff in Fremont? But the bigger stuff you want to do in the city, yeah, you come in for the zoo. You come in for big concerts in Omaha. You can't have a huge concert hall out in the middle of, Wahoo, Nebraska, Meade, Nebraska. But you'll come in and you'll watch, whatever the big country artist is, Blake Shelton or whatever in Omaha. So if you're looking at this thing, the villages are going to be about the Fremont, the Blair sizes, You get out a little bit further, and these people need, and it's kind of like, so in those areas, Fremont itself, look at the little hamlets around the village. Fremont's got Hooper, it's got all those little towns around there, because to them, they've got their local little gas stations and churches and bars, but Fremont is the bigger area. Now, if you get out on the very edge, if you look where the towns are, where it says T, that's going to be hours away from the city. And that's when you get out there so far where people are going, yeah, if I'm going to an operation, I'm going all the way into Omaha. But otherwise, why would I leave Grand Island? Why would I leave Norfolk? Why would I leave blah, 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 blah? And these are the points so far out that now people aren't going to travel. Remember that whole range that people would go for stuff? Now people aren't going to travel for distance for certain things. So now those towns on the edge of the hex are going to start becoming big areas, and they're going to have little hexes around them. And then there's a point, kids, where you see the cities on the other hexes. There's a point in Nebraska when you get so far west, Omaha is no longer the center of our hinterland, our hexagon. Hinterland means outer areas, the far out areas, and we're not just talking up about like Bancroft, Nebraska and stuff. We're talking about areas away from the center in Omaha. In Nebraska, we in Omaha think we're everything. We're not. Go up to Lindsay, Nebraska. It's a heck of a place. Go to Wilbur, Nebraska. Great towns, great people. But anyhow, if you're looking at the town there's a point out there in Nebraska where everything starts looking to a city in another hex, okay? For example, North Platte, Nebraska. North Platte, Nebraska is 4 hours away. It is on the edge of the limit, where Omaha is the big city. You start going further west than North Platte, and you're either talking about Wyoming, Cheyenne, or Laramie, or you're talking about Denver or Colorado, okay? It's the same thing. Omaha is the big city here, but you start going north, there's going to be a point where Sioux City is going to be the thing. Or Sioux Falls, South of here, yeah, everything down to Beatrice kind of feeds in Omaha, but anything the other side of Beatrice, those people go to St. Joe or go to Kansas City. So this works. Now, if you've got this concept down that people will drive so far for stuff, and that also explains, like, again, if you look at the hex, you can't have big cities right next to each other unless you got a Minneapolis, St. Paul. But usually you have the big city and the area around it, the little hamlets are where you're going to have those type businesses. And the further out you go, you're going to have bigger. Let's take a look at the map of Nebraska and see if it's true. All right, take a look at this Nebraska map. Here's on the east side of the river is Omaha. Well, Omaha was the first, Nebraska was settled off the Missouri River and then it spreads west. But the trails through Omaha going to California and going to Oregon and Washington are big. And then the railroads go through Omaha. So Omaha becomes a transportation center. Today we got Interstate 80. But if you look at Omaha, Omaha is the big hub, okay? Now, right along Omaha, look at the little towns, your Fort Calhouns, okay? Come west. Bennington used to be this. Today, Kennard, Arlington, love Arlington. Hey, Washington County Fair. You got to go to Washington County Fair, right? Demo Derby. Go west of Bennington, You ever heard of Lashera, Nebraska? It's right on the Platte there. There's nothing really there. You start going west, you got like Fremont. Wahoo. You got Utan. If you go on Dodge Street, you got Utan. Ashland used to be kind of this way. Gretna used to be a little town. But the interstate goes right past Gretna, and that's growth. There's Omaha's growing that way. So according to Christaller, you're going to have the big town, and right around there, you're going to have little things. And for about 20 miles on either side of Omaha, you are going to have those little towns. But then people start getting out. When you start getting out 30 miles, hey, well, people are, if you're going to Blair, not quite 30 miles, but people in Blair are going to have, if you have friends in Blair, they've got a movie theater, they've got, grocery stores and stuff like that in Blair. Blair's kind of a big town. If you live between Blair and Omaha, like Fort Calhoun, if you're closer to Blair, you go to Blair for stuff, or otherwise you go to Omaha. On the other side, if you get up towards Tacoma, those people really got to ask themselves how much do they want it, because depending what side of Tacoma you're on, you're going to go to South Sioux City instead of Omaha. Fremont is kind of that way, okay? Now, Lincoln is an anomaly because, of course, that's the state capital. But even if you think from Lincoln there, if you take Lincoln out of the picture, even Lincoln's got places around Lincoln. Get your Waverlys, Milfords, Creeks, stuff like that, Hickman, okay? Now, there's going to be a point out that when you start getting out a little bit further, the hex is not pure. Again, if you go back and look. So here's Omaha in the middle. You got your little towns like we talked about, Wahoo and all those other ones, Utan. You get further out, these villages are going to be the little bigger town. Look at Nebraska, Columbus, okay? Columbus is a great little town, but it's not little if you go to it. But there's a point when you get way out there, you're an hour away from Omaha, Columbus starts to become a bigger town. And it's starting to be that circle out there, if you come back here, those villages out there, Columbus in Nebraska. Norfolk, in effect, becomes something like that, doesn't it? And if you come down south, basically, isn't that like Beatrice, right? Grand Island? Now, that would be kind of like a nice little hexagonal thing. But Nebraska, we've got this thing called the Sandhills. And if you look out in the Sandhills, look out in western Nebraska, you don't see a lot of roads. That's because that's cowboy country, okay? So it kind of throws this off. But the concept of Christaller saying where cities are the way they are applies, okay? Now let's go back to what we talked about. Why don't we have a grocery store in Bennington? We did it one time, but as the bigger grocery stores have moved out to the suburbs, can you compete? And so you start thinking about, yeah, you can go up to Cubby's and get groceries if you need to. And I get a lot of stuff at Cubby's, love Cubby's. But when you start talking about building Walmarts and stuff like that, you need enough people there to make it worth your while. Remember that other phrase or word, threshold. You need enough people to make a Walmart worthwhile. It takes a lot of people to make a Walmart supercenter, okay? And so what's happening is we're actually too close to Omaha to get those stuff. And those things are going to be built where the people are, and we're always going to lose that business to those areas, okay? What do we have in Bennington? We've got some great restaurants. Nate's, the Warehouse, you bet they're good, We've got we've got Subway, we've got Runza. Those are great things. People will always get stuff like that in small towns. In old days, you used to tell when you stopped becoming a hamlet was when you got your first fast food restaurant. If you're a town so small you don't have a Runza, then you're a small town. So it's kind of weird. Will we ever get those other things? Eventually, as the population growth keeps coming around Bennington, then it's very possible. But remember, if people are going to drive, Bennington's not that far from Maple Street. And on Maple Street, you've got the big grocery stores, you got your Hy-Vees, your Bakers, your Super Targets, your Super Walmarts. And it's hard to compete for the number of people that Bennington has and how far people are willing to drive. So today's lesson was Christaller. How far would you drive for that? And it kind of explains the little towns around here. The type of businesses they have are going to be locally, things that people need like gas, quick shops, stuff like that, or other little stuff. You're going to have farm and grain stuff. You're going to have grain elevators and other stuff like that. But when you start talking about big chains or other big stuff, probably not. Bennington, we've got a small drugstore, but we don't have the Walgreens and stuff like that. But we do have what we have. We're Bennington. Come on. So you're going to have small places in these towns, but you're never going to have all the stuff the big city has because of threshold, because of centrality, and because of range. So hopefully you take and understand a simple theory, Christaller's theory, and see how it does kind of, in a way, apply to Nebraska. But what's a limitation? Like every other model, it's not perfect. In Nebraska, you've got Norfolk and then O'Neill and that was a railway went out west, Interstate 80 changed everything because of all the traffic on Interstate 80. When you look at this map of Nebraska, again, find Kansas City, Omaha. Look at Omaha, you look at Interstate 80, and look at all the growth along Interstate 80. In Nebraska, the counties that are growing the most and the towns that are growing the most, are those along Interstate 80 because you get a lot of traffic through there, okay? It's just the way it is. So the model doesn't explain everything, but it does explain a lot. All right, hopefully you understand, and we'll keep moving on with urban geography. Have a good week, kids.